All About Relationships is an engaging, lighthearted, and practical show designed to help people improve their relationships in meaningful ways. Hosted by Dr. Don Allen, a certified Gottman therapist, as well as an advanced trainer for the Institute. He is also certified in emotion-focused therapy. With over 40 years of experience in the field of psychotherapy, Dr. Allen is here to provide expert guidance on strengthening marriages, parent-child relationships, friendships, and more. Through insightful discussions, audience call-ins, and guest experts, viewers receive real-world strategies to enhance intimacy, communication, and overall relationship satisfaction. So now, please welcome the host of All About Relationships, Dr. Don Allen.
And hello and welcome back. This is All About Relationships, working towards ideal marriages and loving, lasting relationships. I'm Dr. Don Allen. Today we're going to have a really good show today. I wanted to kind of get back to basics a little bit without, kind of doing a rerun. And I think I've been able to do it today. I hope you'll agree with me. So today the title of my show is Your Private Tour Through Gottman's Relationship House. Okay, now one of the things we mentioned at the very beginning is I am an advanced trainer for the Gottman Institute. So I not only provide educational workshops for just folks wanting to come in and learn all about the Gottman method, but I also train clinicians to become certified. So I'm going to give you some of the benefit of that knowledge and wisdom. I really want to shout out and give credit to John and Julie Gottman. That's their brainchild, and they have really helped develop and perfect this so that we all can not only enjoy this knowledge, but we can apply it to have great relationships. John didn't just work on troubled marriages and relationships. He also worked on what does the best relationships, how does it happen? What do they do to make their relationships great day in and day out? And we're going to talk about that today through the concept of the relationship house. So I have talked about it on my show before, but let's go ahead and do more of a quarter tour. I would give you the dollar tour, but it would take me about 2-3 hours to do that. So what I'm going to do is to kind of start with the general tour, and then next week and the week after, we're going to talk more about the specifics, not only of this, but just the foundations of how to have a great relationship for you and your person. So that's what we're going to do. So I always say, what have you done for your relationship today? Well, the good news is you're doing it right now. We're going to be looking through this and building on the relationship. I always encourage you, if you're watching it individually, because this show is taped, to go back with your person and watch it with them. Stop the tape and really show them kind of what I'm talking about, and then discuss it and how it pertains to your relationship. That's really what this whole show's mission is about, is to take this information and give it to you all so that you can have a great relationship. One of the things I always try to do is say, if you'd like to contact me, I want to show you some of my information that you can find me at. And again, once you go back to my show, you can always just stop this and stop the tape and then actually look at how to contact me. Really value your information. You might want me to have a guest speaker on the show. You might want me to talk about a certain topic that's really important to you. Whatever that is, please give me that feedback so that I'm able to apply it and make this show more specific to all of you. So anyway, I have to move quickly today because we have so much good content. But again, the title of the show is Your Private Tour Through Gottman's Relationship House. So I want to talk a little bit about why that's important to us, okay? So just put some questions out there for you. First one is, do you understand how your relationship really works? Or are you just reacting as you go? Just kind of day in and day out, we'll wing it, right? If John Gottman watched your last conflict, could he predict your future, good or bad? And I'll talk to you about some of his research and why that is a particularly interesting question. Are you building a relationship or slowly eroding your relationship without even realizing it? Well, the relationship house will help you not only understand that, but to build on the good, right? So the last one is, do you know the sound relationship house, and how can you make it work for you? And that's exactly what we're going to be doing today. Remember, this is an educational show. It's not psychotherapy. So just trying to get you some good news that you can apply to your relationship so that you can have day in and day out positive interactions with your person. Okay. One main goal I have is to think, was this information I'm giving you true 2,000 years ago? Or will it be probably true 2,000 years from now? The reason I do that is I stay away from trends. I can talk about what's trending, but I'm going to apply it to this paradigm because what I find is, there's a certain amount of reality to people are always people. And if we just stick to some of those ground foundations of our relationships, it goes better. Plus, I don't want to get into all of the stuff that's happening on the media. It isn't going to help us at all. So, just looking for those types of goals. Remember, the Gottman Institute talks about always seek to understand with your partner before you seek to fix it. So, what we're going to do is understand that relationship house today. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about that. What makes relationships succeed or fail, right? Well, the Gottman Institute has over 40 plus years of research that's designed to really understand what goes right and what goes wrong with relationships. So, in one of John's books at the very beginning, The Seven Principles, he talks about how he can predict with 93% certainty after watching a newlywed couple argue for 15 minutes on a video whether they would divorce within 5 years. And that really got people's attention way back when, and it still does, right? Now, I will say the good news with that is, you might say, well, gosh, if John watched us do this, or if John and Julie watched us argue, we would be goners. This would be terrible. Not at all. What he means by that is those types of things that he can predict, if we can correct them, doesn't necessarily mean that no matter what happens, you're doomed. So what you want to do is to find the things that are predictive of failure and predictive of success, and then emulate those, and then do it on a regular basis. One real perk you're going to get from that is as you do it, you're going to want to connect more with your partner, and they're going to want to reach back towards you. So those things are really, really good because people usually report feeling a lot better when they use some of these tools, right? Okay. So the other thing we want to look at is what are the intervention methods that we can talk about today that can help change the course of the future. One thing I really haven't gotten on this show, and I've given it a lot of thought, and we are going to be doing that in the next half year, is to talk about conflict resolution and what that means. I'm going to talk a little bit about that today in my tour, but I want to kind of get you interested in that because a lot of people, conflict is not a good word. We can't have conflict. We can't have, back and forth negative interaction. I got to stay away from that. Not at all, but you have to do it correctly. And we know how, and I can help you with that. So we're going to talk about those things. So the other thing that we're going to do is look at this relationship house, not just as a metaphor, but as a compilation of a lot of data that really points to how this relationship house operates. And I need to give you that in the tour. So we're going to talk about those things. So one thing I want to start out with is that the relationship house, and we'll put it up right now, but the relationship house is really divided into three sections. Okay. So when I look at the three sections, and you can see it here, it's the bottom three, which is the friendship house. Okay. That's the friendship part of the house in the relationship house. The middle section is the conflict house. Right? We're going to talk about that in the middle section of the show. And want to also make connection with the third floor of the relationship house, which is to create shared meaning, to make your partner and your dreams come true. And I'm going to explain why that's so important when it does come to conflict, because sometimes people don't realize that these are the areas that you fall into and you tend to fight the hardest about, and they don't go away, and they just make each other really frustrated. The load-bearing walls, what holds the house up is trust and commitment, right? So we need to pay attention to how those parts of the middle interact with those other two to keep the house strong and solid, right? I always kind of add things a little bit. One thing you notice is there's a house roof that goes there. Well, that's good boundaries. What do we keep in our relationship and what do we protect and keep out of our relationship? It's very important. So all of this stuff is interactive, meaning that one really affects the other. Now, the other part I will allude to is that middle one, that positive perspective I didn't mention earlier. The positive perspective is assuming the good about your partner, right? But what happens with symptomatic relationships is we start noticing the negative about our partner and we start resenting them or criticizing them. And a real symptom of the problem with that is that it starts to cloud the friendship, it starts to create distance, and it can affect the trust and the commitment pillar. So that's a really important gateway from the first floor, which is friendship house, to the second floor, which is managed conflict. But those three things that I mentioned, higher meaning part of the house, the conflict part of the house, and the friendship part of the house, have to be built. I explain this when I train clinicians to go out and help you all, is that you have to help the couple know it and build it. So we're going to talk about that today because that's how important it is. So those are things that I think I want to talk about here coming up soon. One thing I put down and underlined it is we folks at the Gottman Institute and we clinicians are not gurus. All right. I don't like the idea of, people climbing to the mountain to get the wisdom. The fact of the matter is, with all clinicians and with all of us, if we don't do the things that work well, we're all subject to the same problems in our relationship. So we're all in this together. All of us are pulling and helping and doing so that we can have these great relationships. And they're foundational for helping our families grow and connect. And this is a relationship house. So it applies to your best friends, it applies to your extended family, it applies to your children. My wife actually asked me to do one of these shows on relationships with your kids. Uh, Prior to my specialties with trauma and marriage, I used to work and specialize with children and adolescents. And in fact, I'm published in that and created intervention strategies to help children. So it's not a real stretch for me to give you some pointers about how to really make a difference with your kids. So I may do that show for you coming up. I'll think about it. So we talked about the three parts of the relationship house. And the other thing I'm going to start off with right away is the first floor, which is the friendship house, because we have so much information today. So let's kind of guide our tour over, and you'll notice there's three main parts. One is love maps. Love maps are knowing your partner's internal world, what's important to them. Now, I'm going to expound on this when I start to get to the higher meaning house. But one thing you should be very skilled at is really knowing what's super important to your partner and keeping an eye on that, day to day, week to week, year to year, moment to moment, because these things really help your partner orbit in their world and be happy. Okay. But also, what are your love maps? What matters to you? How do you roll? What do you do that's your identity, and what's so important with that? And then by extension, do you build on that? All right. Do you take that and you apply it to other general things in your life that's very important? It's who you are, but we need to pay attention to who our partner is too. The second part of this is shared fondness and admiration. What I like to talk about with shared fondness and admiration is that, when you hear somebody talk about their person, or you talk about your person, or they talk about you, do you just get a sense, regardless of what they're saying, you know, that person really likes their spouse. That person really likes their partner, their special person. That you can tell they're just tickled to say how great it is to not only know them, but to talk about them. So that fondness and admiration comes through, right? Now, as that happens, I always like to look at things like loyalty, respect, adoration, right? And reciprocity. Do we go back and forth with that? So we'll talk more about those. If you've watched past episodes, I've mentioned that. But for John and Julie, that fondness and admiration is really an important component to be happening regularly in the friendship house. The last one is turn towards. This one's more medical. We need to make sure we turn towards each other a minimum of 34% of the time. But even that is you're missing connective bids 2/3 of the time. To me, that's way too low. The really good relationships and what we should all shoot for is successful bids with our partner 86% of the time. 86% of the time, because then our partner knows that we see them, we hear them, we care for them, and they are loved. So when we come back, we're going to talk a little bit more about this guided tour through the relationship house. We've already started with friendship. Let's move forward. We'll see you in a moment.
Mike Zorek, a three-time California state champion in Greco-Roman wrestling at 114 pounds. Mike, blind since birth, was born in Hartford, Connecticut. He was a six-time national placer, including 2 seconds, 2/3, and 2/4. He also won the Veterans Folk-Style Wrestling twice at 152 pounds. In all these tournaments, he was the only blind competitor. Nancy Zorek, a creative spirit whose talents have taken her to the stage and into galleries and exhibitions in several states. Her father, a commercial artist who shared his instruments with his daughter and helped her fine-tune her natural abilities, influenced her decision to follow in his footsteps. Ms. Zorek has enjoyed a fruitful career doing what she loves. Listen Saturday mornings at 12 Eastern for the Nancy and Mike Show for heartwarming stories and interesting talk.
Are you struggling to care for elderly parents or a spouse? Do you wonder if being a caregiver is making you sick? Are you worried about taking time off work to care for elderly parents and balance work, life, and caregiving? Has caregiving become exhausting and emotionally draining? Are you an aging adult who wants to remain independent, but you're not sure how? I'm Pamela D. Wilson. Join me for the Caring Generation radio show for caregivers and aging adults, Wednesday evenings, 6 Pacific, 7 Mountain, 8 Central, and 9 Eastern, where I answer these questions and share tips for managing stress, family relationships, health, well-being, and more. Podcasts and transcripts of The Caring Generation are on my website, PamelaDWilson.com, plus my caregiving library, online caregiver support programs, and programs for corporations interested in supporting working caregivers. Help, hope, and support for caregivers is here on The Caring Generation and PamelaDWilson.com.
Okay, and we're back. We are talking about a guided tour today through the relationship house with the Gottman Institute. So, how do you create the sound relationship house? Well, we've already talked a little bit about what goes into the first floor, which is friendship. Okay, so very important that we always keep in mind that we're doing this because, for example, they're interrelated. So if I go into the managing conflict house, so let's say I do have a conflict that I need to fix, and I'm going to give you the skills on how to do that. We always want to keep in mind that we want to go back and connect through the friendship house. We want to repair. We want to do all these things that are very important to keep that relationship happy and healthy and alive. So you can already start to see how I interact with this relationship house simultaneously. Okay. Well, the second floor of the house is managing conflict, but I'm going to do that one in the the third segment of our show, because I've not really talked a lot about it. So I want to give the kind of the spotlight of my show that particular topic. So let's go ahead and just walk past the conflict house to the third floor and talk about create shared meaning and make each other's dreams come true. Now, if you notice the interrelationship between love maps, because a lot of times love maps are how we roll, what we like to do, what we bounce out of bed in the morning doing, but keeping in mind what really is our global mission in life, right? So I put a couple questions down here that really, to me, talk about shared meaning and make each other's dreams come true. So, for example, question: have you ever sat down and talked about what dreams that your partner has or wants? Have you ever sat down and says, tell me about your life dreams, tell me about your goals, right? um, One of the things I sometimes ask people is, what do you want to say about your life when you're 80 years old? Okay, you're 80 years old, and a lot of your life is lived, and what do you want to say you've accomplished? I've talked to people throughout my life, and let's say you have somebody with a 60th wedding anniversary and you go to the party, and let's say they're in their 80s, and they may look around the room and say, everybody in this room is here because we generated this whole thing. They really feel a lot of content and joy with not only who's in the room, but how much love is in the room. Because sometimes one of the shared meanings couples have is to create the ability for the people they love to love and love in return. So that's important. Do you both have a purpose-driven life, and what does it look like for that purpose? Well, that's a great question, isn't it? These are all higher meaning house questions. Okay. Another one I hear a lot in life is, what is the meaning of money, and how should we save it, or how should we spend it? And how do we look to the future, and what's our mutual goals or not? Um, so another one, do we want to see the world? We want to travel and experience things and go to different places, to go to Europe, to go to South America, whatever. Do we want to do that? Or do we want to just sit in the house and watch TV all day? Or sure, we want to hang around, but we really don't want to leave the city. We just like where we live. We don't want to go out. What are those goals? What do people experience? And when they're 80, do they want to say that they saw Europe, or do they want to say, boy, am I glad I never went to Europe? Have to see. Right? Another one that's really big in life for people is, do we want to have children, and how should we raise them? So again, I hope you're hearing the higher meaning part of the relationship house. Very, very important. I could go on and on with this, but I really want to just kind of prime the pump for you. I often say that some of these things are interesting, but I want it to pertain to your life and what's going on for you. But in a bigger way, have you really discussed this with your person? Have you really ever sat down and done this? Some people do this when they start to go down life and they get engaged and they want to get married and they want to kind of, mingle life together. Sometimes these things will really come up in that. Sometimes people, let's say they met, online. Well, what kind of an app did they use to meet online? What kind of things were they looking at? What was important to them? Some people do not want to live in a big city. Some people do not want to live on a farm. And sometimes they ask those questions about each other when they're first just starting to date and have an app, right? So that's really important, to have these conversations and really listen to where your partner is, not to compete with them, not to argue back and forth whether they're right or wrong, or I'm right or wrong, but to really tell me about what's important to you in your life. Another one about that is that, again, a follow-up question might be, is that happening in your life? Do you notice that that's going on, right? Now, I want to add, just because you might have done this when you were 25 and engaged, I'm making that up, but whenever you were, what's it going to be like 50 years from now? Life changes, life happens to people. We have a lot of parts of our life. We have the part of our life where we graduate from high school. Some people go into the workforce, some people go to college, right? But that's another life. And then they start the world at some point in the job market. And then they start generating things, generating houses, cars, kids, all of those things that we create in our world, not only for us, but for those that we love. So all of those things have a lot to do with where we are at with higher meaning, So it requires a conversation. And then from time to time, we want to look at that, right? When people are retiring, what's their idea of retirement? A lot of people have had friends and family throughout their lives, but when they start to get older, that changes, right? Maybe some of the people that they've always been in their life with, they don't have anymore. I was very, very, very young in my family. So at my age right now, the people like my aunts and uncles, grandparents, parents, all those people are gone, because again, I was born when they were quite a bit older than I was. So how does that affect how I have people in my life? Well, I have to think about that. So do you, and so does your partner, right? Some people have had tons of people in their lives. Some people have had just a few. What's important to you? How do you get a certain amount of that? Well, that requires that discussion. So we really want to pay attention to those kind of things. Now, one thing about that is that when we start to get into the conflict house, you're going to see where this one is something people really go round and round and round about. Now, I'm going to explain why, but I'm also going to talk about why you need conflict intervention skills that work to really move forward in these issues. The one I want to talk about before my next break, though, is that positive perspective one, that fourth one that's up on that screen there, the positive perspective. One of the things I notice with drift, and I've spent time on my show, as you know, talking about drift, getting away from, moving away from that ideal relationship that people long for, right? And a lot of times it happens subtly, just like all of a sudden you look up and you've gained 10 pounds. How did that happen? Well, you didn't just gain 10. Chances are you gained it a little bit at a time, right? Relationships are the same way. They can drift out of sync. So we want to make sure that we don't let that happen. Well, one place that you're going to find that it will start to occur in the relationship house is the positive perspective. So let's say over time you begin to notice little things about your partner that annoy you. And let's say you try to correct them, but they don't. You know what? So what? That's no big deal. But what if it does matter to you? Now all of a sudden you're noticing it more. It's a pebble in your shoe. And now you're starting to anticipate, my partner's going to do something that annoys me, right? That's where the positive perspective goes to negative sentiment override. That's John's term for it, negative sentiment override. So the sentiment about your partner, the experience of your partner starts to turn negative. And now what happens is you start to accumulate reasons to make your argument to be negative. So now that's rolling down the hill, isn't it? It's like a snowball and it's not good, right? So now we start to see our partner in a negative way. Now, one thing I've mentioned on the show, we should always have at least 5 minutes of positive experience with our partner to every 1 minute of negative. Always want to do that. So usually when the relationship's really working well, it's 20 minutes to 1 minute. But now a negative sentiment override starts to happen. And now we can start to fall below that 5 minutes of positive. So that negativity begins to turn us against our partner. Maybe not in great ways, but enough that it's affecting the relationship house. Now the trust. I trust that it's not going to work, not that it will. And in time, you really start getting that. Now we aren't interested as much as being friends, and we aren't having the fondness and admiration that we should experience. And we're not making those bids for connection at 86% because our momentum is turning away through that negative sentiment override. In time, that can really go bad and influence the commitment pillar. When people begin to say, well, could I be doing better in my life? What about a better partner? We don't want to ever get to those points where that negativity is really, really affecting the house in that way. Okay, so the positive perspective to me is not only a gateway, but it's a real important barometer to keep in mind. And you can do it in reverse. You can also look if things are starting to happen in a negative way. So maybe the sex life isn't what it was. Maybe there's resentment. Maybe there's arguments and fights that should be happening in a positive way that are just getting overlooked, and people are getting more and more stuck in that negative system. That would be the bad when we talk about good, bad, and ugly. So we don't ever want it to get there. Instead, what we want to do is we want to maintain this on a regular basis and shoo out that negative sentiment override and start to see our partner in a positive way. One thing I talked about, and we'll talk about more coming up, is just this idea of building a culture of appreciation. A lot of times what we're mad about and we're having negative sentiment override, we're doing a version of it, but we're really kind to ourselves. We're not doing this in a way that we are giving ourselves grief, but we are noticing that grief in other people. So, yes, my partner did A, B, and C, but you know what? I do A, B, and C in this way, and they're really cool with me. So maybe I should, begin to look that people are people rather than expecting people to be more than they really can be. The other thing we want to talk about in the next section is to go ahead and talk about the conflict skills. Now, I can't give them to you in a way that really will do it justice in my tour. But what I do want to do is start having shows that are devoted to each one of these conflict resolution skills so that you all have an idea of, or a blueprint to really get through that. Conflict should be something you look forward to get rid of it. It shouldn't be something that you avoid because it's awful. Okay. So when we come back, we're going to talk about the conflict house, and then we'll go to our fun part where we all go out and do an exercise together and then come back and see how it went. We'll see you shortly.
Master of words, powerful player. What life-changing words can Dr. Janet Smith Warfield pull out of her magical toolbox that just might mysteriously open a door you never knew was there? A door to free yourself from fear forever. Transform your rage into right action. Release your guilt. Position you into a life of freedom, purpose, passion, power, and peace. All quite suddenly, unexpectedly, and almost miraculously, with no effort on your part. Join Dr. Janet on Dancing with Words, Dancing with Wisdom, as she and her guests show you how words map our experiences, immersing you in a sound bath that relaxes your muscles, opens your mind, and supports you in co-creating your extraordinary life. Author, radio show host, and coach John M. Hawkins reveals strategies to help gain perspective, build confidence, find clarity, achieve goals. John M. Hawkins' new book, Coached to Greatness, Unlock Your Full Potential with Limitless Growth, published by iUniverse. Hawkins reveals strategies to help readers accomplish more. He believes the book can coach them to greatness. Hawkins says that the best athletes get to the top of their sport with the help of coaches, mentors, and others. He shares guidance that helps readers reflect on what motivates them, rediscover and assess their core values, philosophies, and competencies, find settings that allow them to be the most productive, and track their progress towards accomplishing goals.
Okay, welcome back. We are going to this next segment on conflict. So I hope you're all waiting with bated breath, because this one I haven't talked much about, but it is so central to not only our happiness, but our good relationship skills. So this part of the house is the conflict house. You see it right in the middle. It says managing conflict. But before we go there, I want to give you some interesting questions, okay? Because this, I think, really helps kind of predicate how conflict happens. So these are my questions for you. So how did you learn to have conflict growing up? How did your family manage conflict? Okay. As you settle or have settled into your relationship, do you notice that conflict patterns started to emerge that weren't good? How do we fight, right? Now remember, 69% of the things people argue about cannot be resolved. They can't. They're perpetual problems. Of that percentage, there's some that we call gridlock, and I'll talk a little bit about that later. But have you noticed that conflict is happening like a pebble in your shoe, and that you've drifted away from each other, but have no idea how to return to the good and what conflict skills would help deliver you from the bad? These are really, really good questions, folks, because I think most people have these at some point in their relationship. Okay. So one of the things that you notice at the top of the manage conflict area is that John and Julie Gottman points out the need to accept influence. And I've talked about a lot of this on my show. Accepting influence here really means that you convey to your partner that you're really interested in their point of view, that you really want to know how they see things. And you're accepting that understanding from them, whether you agree with it or not. One, you've heard it, and two, they know that you cared to listen to it before you even go into the conflict. That gets back to what I said earlier: seek to understand before you seek to fix. So that's just a real important component as we go into conflict management. Okay, the lower one is practice self-soothing. A lot of times what happens with conflict is it upsets us. Anger is when, you have an issue where there's frustration and something stands between you and resolving a problem. So those two things together create an anger, effect in your life, right? So something blocking you from achieving a goal and being frustrated about it. So you can start to see where anger can start to emerge in conflict when these types of things are happening, right? So one of the things we have to have as a skill set is to practice the ability to settle down. We a lot of times when we have kids, we put them in timeout. Right now, a long time ago, timeouts were associated with being shamed, like for example, putting you in the corner. But putting somebody in the corner did reduce the stimulation in the room, which wouldn't necessarily be bad if you have an upregulated kid. It was the shame part of it that we realized was bad. So a lot of times we'd have people take a timeout. Why do we think that after we grow up, we don't need timeouts? We do. In fact, there's a whole part that I teach on flooding that talks about all of our need to be able to settle down and get back to thinking right. So that's another part of the conflict house before I get too far afield in showing you the 4 conflict interventions in my guided tour today. So again, the ability to seek, to understand before we seek to fix, to genuinely and with empathy care about our partner's point of view, and then be able to settle down when we get worked up. And that pertains to our partner too, right? So all of us need to settle down. When we are flooded, we're out of our thinking brain. So it's extremely important that we just go and ramp down and practice methods that actually get us to where we can think again, and then go back to the friendship house, connect, repair, and then maybe get back to that conflict that we were all tangled up about, right? So very, very important things to think about. So let's go into that next section. I got to go clear down here to that third section and want to talk about it. There are 4 types of conflict resolutions. Did you know that? Okay, so if you didn't know it, well, chances are you really want to pay close attention to what I'm talking about. The first one is miscommunication. We know from research at the Gottman Institute that people are only about 25% effective in communicating. So we don't avoid conflict, we expect it. And there's so many ways that can happen. My wife and I right now, I'll tell you, the house we live in, and we're getting older, so our hearing is not as good as it used to be. And then you have tall ceilings, and now we're going, what? A lot. And we kind of laugh about it, but you know what? It can be silently annoying for both of us, right? But miscommunication, did we hear our partner and did we get the intended meaning of what they said? Right. A lot of times, if you ever thought about it, people will talk and they're not really listening to their partner. What they're doing is they're waiting for their partner to take a breath so they can jump in. So the purpose is to prevail with their point of view, and the other person doesn't feel listened to or taken seriously. Not good. So one of the first things we do is we have a way of solving problems when miscommunication arises. So that's one of the ways we do that. Now, at the Gottman Institute, we call that the Rappaport exercise. And again, this is my quarter tour. But one of the things I intend to do is to take some of these episodes coming up and really showing you what it looks like. Probably have some guests on the show so that we can really show you together and have some fun with it. So we're going to kind of do that. So the first one is miscommunication and what we do about it. The next one is what John and Julie call the aftermath of a fight or the aftermath of a regrettable incident. Okay, so this one, and what's really important with this one is it's kind of what I call the what happened conflict. Right now, remember, we're already at 25% efficiency. So that's not good. And then the next thing is somebody's going to do something that annoys the other. I go to the store, I forget to pick up something for my wife. She really needed it. I come home and I don't have it. That's what went wrong. That is what went wrong, right? So you can have a whole fight right over that. And then if I want to use the defensive horseman, I can say, well, you forget stuff too. And now she really doesn't feel like I've seen the fact that she's in pain because I forgot something. And here the fight goes. Okay. So with this particular intervention, what we want to do is we want to go back and forth and really make sure each of us knows not only how they saw the problem, but also how they felt. Other thing we'd like to do is to talk about, anything that really set you off. You ever have something that really was annoying? I remember in Catholic school, the nuns used to talk about their pet peeves. a lot. And what that meant is something that we did wrong that really particularly annoyed them. So that's kind of what we call a trigger in the Gottman Institute. And those things are, what gets you from a 2 to an 8 on the upsetometer when you go into the argument, right? The last couple there, what we try to do is we try to take turns saying what we did wrong. And then lastly, what we're going to do next time to make it better and repair it. So this particular intervention has definite steps to it in order for us to solve it. But I'm really not giving you the full details on purpose because I just don't have time. The next one, now we're going to start tying this relationship house together. The next one usually involves higher meaning issues, something that you really can't yield on because it would affect how you roll, your values, your work ethic, those types of things, right? And the world is full of these right now. And a lot of times what you'll notice is people recognize this, and on the media, they fan it so that you watch them more. Okay. But what they do is they fan an issue with your core belief system, with something that's really, really important to you. And if you have one that's in direct contrast to the other person's core issue or value, now we're going to have a problem that tends to make you fight more because you're not really fighting up here about the argument. You're really fighting about something you believe strongly in. You see what I'm saying? So you'll see these throughout life. People, how many kids do they want to have? How should we save money? So if the meaning I have about saving money is if I don't save money for retirement, I can't protect my family. And my core value is I've got to protect my family at all costs. You can see where if the other person wanted to spend money and not save for retirement, that could be a real problem, right? Now, if both of them are in agreement of saving money, it isn't. If both of them say, hey, we're not going to save money, we'll just rely on Medicare, well, there's not a problem until maybe they're retired. But what happens is it's when you have diametrically opposed ways of thinking about something that means that much to you. Very, very, very important. So, one of the things I noticed when I was growing up is my mom was French, and she went through the war, occupied France, and her father was prisoner of war. And they all finally got reunited at the end of the war, which was a blessing because some people did not make it back. But my mom really believed and really prayed to Jesus that, please let France be France. And when it happened, my mom always felt an incredible desire to thank Jesus for making that happen. So it was very important to her that all of her kids went to Catholic school. It was very important that we all went to church, right? It's very important. But do you hear the belief system behind it? It isn't just, yeah, probably people ought to go to church. It was the meaning she gave it. So these particular arguments are very, very personal to people. And when they're opposed to the other, that's where we have one that we call the why argument. Why should we do it this way? Why should we do it that way? In my case, why should we go to Catholic school rather than public school? Why should I attend church? Those are really important whys to my mom, you see. So that's what happens in relationships, that we cross over somebody's really big meaning. And when that happens, they really get passionate about it. So we have an intervention skill that we have to understand where people are coming from and those meaning related arguments and those core values, those core beliefs, those core ethics, how that really shapes their idea. And there's a series of questions that we ask to really help understand that. The last one is the main one for getting to yes, where most of these other ones have been about just getting to a point where you can understand. This last one is how do we get a working solution, you and me, against the problem to solve it once we know where our partner's coming from. Okay, so those are the 4 intervention skills. When we come back, we're going to have an exciting exercise that we all can go back and do and talk to each other. And then hopefully you'll give me some feedback on what you think. And I will start to take this tour and kind of drill down to really give us some practical core skills on making our relationship house even better. We'll see you shortly.
Are you struggling to care for elderly parents or a spouse? Do you wonder if being a caregiver is making you sick? Are you worried about taking time off work to care for elderly parents and balance work, life, and caregiving? Has caregiving become exhausting and emotionally draining? Are you an aging adult who wants to remain independent, but you're not sure how? I'm Pamela D. Wilson. Join me for the Caring Generation radio show for caregivers and aging adults, Wednesday evenings, 6 Pacific, 7 Mountain, 8 Central, and 9 Eastern, where I answer these questions and share tips for managing stress, family relationships, health, well-being, and more. Podcasts and transcripts of The Caring Generation are on my website, PamelaDWilson.com, plus my caregiving library, online caregiver support programs, and programs for corporations interested in supporting working caregivers. Help, hope, and support for caregivers is here on The Caring Generation and PamelaDWilson.com.
Master of words, powerful player. What life-changing words can Dr. Janet Smith Warfield pull out of her magical toolbox that just might mysteriously open a door you never knew was there? A door to free yourself from fear forever. Transform your rage into right action. Release your guilt. Position you into a life of freedom, purpose, passion, power, and peace. All quite suddenly, unexpectedly, and almost miraculously, with no effort on your part. Join Dr. Janet on Dancing with Words, Dancing with Wisdom, as she and her guests show you how words map our experiences, immersing you in a sound bath that relaxes your muscles, opens your mind, and supports you in co-creating your extraordinary life.
Okay, welcome back. I'm Dr. Don Allen. This is all about relationships, working towards ideal marriages and loving, lasting relationships. We're in the fourth part of our show, and this is where we go and have an exciting exercise. We can all take this information and go play with it. All right. So want to shout out last week something that I said that I'm going to give you quick. So you're probably going to have trouble writing it down. So you just freeze the thing and write it down. But the 8 major life areas that I talked about last week were our spiritual life, our health, our love life, right? Our family life, our social life, our job, our money, and then the last one's activities and fun. So I just want you to have that because I want you to keep that in mind if you want it when I give you our exercise today. And again, I'm going to do this too. It's not like I'm asking you guys to do homework or something. I'm asking you to go have fun. So what I want you to do is to prepare to sit down with your person and have the following conversation. Okay. So sit down with a copy of the Sound Relationship House. Now, the Relationship House I've got up there for you. You can get off the internet, or I encourage you to go to the Gottman Institute and really do a tour with them, because this is where this information is coming from. Shout out to John and Julie Gottman. I love applying this stuff, but they were the ones that created it, and it took them over 40 years to do it. So you ought to go see everything they have. I think they have over 1.5 million subscribers. I mean, it's huge. So really go and shout out to them and see what they have to offer on that. But sit down with a copy of that Sound Relationship House, okay? And then one of the things I want you to both talk about is 5 things that you notice about that house and what I've talked about today that you think you really do well. That wait a minute, this is, hey, we really do good in fondness and admiration. And boy, we really kind of know each other's love maps. I think we really do good with that. So go through it and see what you think you do well with, okay? And then what I want you to do is to look and find 2 things that you think you could do better on. Well, when Don starts to talking about the good, the bad, and the ugly, we aren't an ugly, but we don't do this so well. This is, our conflict doesn't really do well. And hey, he said something about that idea of what went wrong. Now that we think about it, we clash a lot over what goes wrong during the week. Whatever it is for you, just kind of have fun figuring it out. Not to get into conflict or back and forth negativity or four horsemen. No. Just, hey, you know what? We could do better with that, right? So then what I want you to do is to say, all right, of the ones we just picked, let's find one thing that you and I are going to look at this relationship house and try to make it better this week. And when we notice we're doing it, we're going to tell each other, wait a minute, I just did that. Did you notice? Hey, you did do that. Thank you. We're doing this exercise. I appreciate it. Right. So let's say you were looking at the friendship house and you didn't point out as much of how unconditionally you love your partner. And you just mentioned something like, boy, when I woke up this morning, I just couldn't wait to turn over in bed and just look and see how beautiful you look. And I don't know what it is, but your neck is just amazing. And I just wanted to see your neck and just see how wonderful that it made me feel that you're here with me. Something unconditionally about them. So, that might be a thing that you notice. And the other person goes, well, hey, that's that we were talking about that relationship house thing. You're doing that, aren't you? Yeah. Well, let me tell you one thing I think is great about you, because it usually invites it back. So you'll see this is a pretty cool thing to kind of look at, right? So yeah, just want to take and do those types of activities and see if you can make that better. All right. Just have fun with it. Another one is in your own reflection, if you want to do this, kind of notice where you're kind of in your own mind dogging your partner, kind of noticing what they do wrong all the time, or noticing how things start to string together to annoy you. And then start to build a culture of appreciation. Yeah, they do that. Wonder how I do the same thing, only different. I wonder how I do it, and they really would get annoyed with me, but maybe they're really cool with me about it. So maybe I ought to rethink how I see them about some of the negativity. Remember also what I said, maintain at least 5 minutes of positivity to 1 minute of negative. How come it isn't 3, Don? How come it isn't 8? Because the research said it was 5 minutes to 1 minute. That's why. Okay. And then the other thing is when you're really connecting, it really is 20 minutes of positivity to 1 minute negative, but you're just doing it going along. I always say, love is a blanket, not a pie. If it's a pie, you have to fight for your share of the pie every day. But if it's a blanket, everybody is under that blanket on the couch, warming everybody else, and everybody just feels loved and warmed, and they just don't worry about it. They can just sit there and eat their popcorn, drink their water, and watch the TV show. Again, I'm Dr. Don Allen. This is all about relationships, working towards ideal marriages and loving, lasting relationships. Thank you very much for joining me. I'm enjoying, our population growing every single week. So I thank you for that. I look forward to seeing you next week, 1:00 Eastern time on this channel. So take care, write me, and we'll talk to you next week. Take care.
While All About Relationships is educational and entertaining, it is not a substitute for therapy, counseling, or professional advice, but an informative space for learning and growth. So tune in each week for an engaging and reliable approach to your relationships, ensuring viewers with practical tools to create deeper connections in their daily lives. Whether tackling conflict resolution, emotional intimacy, or family dynamics, this show is your go-to resource for anyone looking to foster healthier, happier relationships in a supportive and lighthearted environment. Every Wednesday, 1 p.m. Eastern.